There's a name modern psychology prefers to whisper, a man who uncovered truths so profound about the human mind that his ideas were deliberately buried. Carl Jung, the forbidden psychologist. But why was one of psychology's greatest geniuses virtually erased from university curricula? Why are his most revolutionary discoveries treated as taboo by official science? And more importantly, what did he discover that so deeply disturbed the psychological establishment? The answer will shock you. Jung wasn't merely censored, he was systematically silenced because his discoveries threatened the entire materialist structure of modern psychology. Because he proved something they didn't want to accept, that the human mind is far more than just neurotransmitters and synapses. Have you ever felt that something greater is operating through your consciousness? As if an ancient wisdom were trying to communicate with you. Jung discovered what that truly is, and that's why they tried to extinguish his light. Prepare for a revelation that will forever change how you see your own mind. It all began in 1907. Jung was Freud's protege, the chosen heir of psychoanalysis. But then something happened. Something that irrevocably shattered their relationship and altered the course of world psychology. Jung began experiencing things science couldn't explain, prophetic dreams, impossible synchronicities, visions that materialized into reality. And instead of dismissing them as hallucinations, he did something revolutionary. He decided to study them scientifically. That's when the light began to bother the shadows. Freud was furious. How dare his brightest protege explore territories materialist science considered forbidden? How dare he suggest there's a spiritual dimension to the human psyche? The break was inevitable, and with it, the beginning of a silent conspiracy that continues to this day, because Jung discovered something that threatened the entire scientific paradigm of his time. He proved that there exists a layer of consciousness connecting all human beings. A shared field of information he called the collective unconscious. But that was only the beginning. The real revelation was yet to come. Jung realized that through this collective unconscious, universal patterns emerged, deep structures shaping human behavior for millennia. He called these patterns archetypes. And here's the part modern psychology doesn't want you to know. These archetypes weren't merely abstract psychological concepts. They were living forces, autonomous entities operating through human consciousness. Jung was describing nothing less than the spiritual anatomy of the mind. Imagine for a moment, if Jung was right, this means your consciousness isn't solely a product of your individual brain. It means you're connected to a network of wisdom that transcends time and space, that through your dreams, intuitions, and synchronicities, you have direct access to the collective wisdom of humanity. This was too revolutionary, too dangerous. Academic psychology made a decision. Instead of exploring these discoveries, they chose to bury them. Jung was gradually marginalized. His deepest theories were labeled mystical and unscientific. His followers were discouraged. His works were removed from required curricula, a silent but effective conspiracy. But Jung didn't give up. He continued his research in secret. And it was during these years of ostracism that he made his most extraordinary discoveries. He began to realize that the archetypes weren't just psychological structures. They were portals, gateways to deeper levels of consciousness. And when a person could consciously access these portals, something magical happened. They awakened. Jung was describing nothing less than a map to enlightenment, a scientific roadmap for spiritual awakening. And that's precisely what the establishment didn't want you to discover, because an awakened humanity is a humanity that can no longer be controlled. Think about it. If people knew they had direct access to universal wisdom through their own consciousness, would they still rely on external authorities to tell them what to think? If they understood that their dreams and intuitions are direct communications from the collective unconscious, would they still need experts to interpret their reality? The answer is obvious, and that's why Jung needed to be silenced. But the truth has a way of resurfacing, especially when someone with the vision of Eckhart Tolle recognizes its value. Tolle always knew Jung had touched on something profound, something that connected directly with his own realizations about the nature of consciousness. And in his teachings, he frequently references Jung's discoveries as scientific validation for spiritual experiences. Do you see the irony? The man academic psychology tried to bury is being resurrected by today's spiritual masters. His discoveries about the collective unconscious are being confirmed by quantum physics. His archetypes are being recognized as accurate maps for inner transformation. Jung wasn't just ahead of his time, he was ahead of our time as well. But there's an aspect of Jung's work that not even Tolle has fully explored, a territory so profound and revolutionary that it can radically transform your understanding of who you truly are. Jung discovered that there's a central archetype, a primordial pattern he called the self. But this self isn't what you think it is. It's not your personality. It's not your ego. It's not even your individual soul. The self is your direct connection to the source. It is through the self that you access not only the collective unconscious, but universal consciousness itself. It is the self that orchestrates the synchronicities in your life. It is the self that sends messages through your dreams. It is the self that whispers truth through your intuition. Jung had scientifically discovered what mystics have always known, that you are not merely a separate individual struggling to survive in a hostile universe. You are a localized expression of cosmic consciousness, temporarily forgetting your true nature. And awakening to this truth is the real goal of every spiritual quest. Now you understand why Jung was silenced, why his deepest discoveries were buried, why modern psychology prefers to focus on symptoms and medications instead of exploring the infinite potential of human consciousness. Because Jung wasn't just studying the mind, he was mapping the way home. Pause for a moment, breathe deeply, feel the vastness that exists within you, because what I'm about to reveal will connect all the pieces of this cosmic puzzle. It will show how Jung's censored discoveries directly connect with Tolle's teachings, and how together they form a complete map for the awakening of consciousness. Jung called this process individuation. Tolle calls it presence, but they're both talking about the same thing: the return to your true nature, the awakening of the sleeping self, the remembrance of who you truly are beyond the layers of conditioning and identification. And the most extraordinary part, this process is happening right now, through you, through millions of people around the planet who are beginning to question the official narratives about the nature of reality. Jung predicted this. He called it the emergence of a new consciousness, a collective evolution that would happen when humanity was ready to transcend its egocentric limitations. That moment is now. You can feel it, can't you? This growing unease. This feeling that there's something much bigger happening beneath the surface of daily life. This intuition that you are here for a reason, deeper than just working, consuming, and dying. Jung would say, this is your self trying to awaken. Tolle would say it's presence calling you back home. I say they're both right. And modern psychology, it would call this anxiety and give you an antidepressant. Now you understand the difference. But how exactly do Jung's discoveries connect with Tolle's teachings? How do these two seemingly different approaches converge on the same destination? And more importantly, how can you use this integrated knowledge to accelerate your own awakening? The answer lies in a specific discovery by Jung that changed everything. A revelation so profound that he hesitated for years before making it public. A truth that explains not only how transformation happens, but why it's inevitable. Jung discovered that the self is not passive. It's not just waiting to be discovered. It's actively working to awaken you, orchestrating events, creating synchronicities, sending messages through dreams and intuitions, guiding you through a carefully planned journey back to wholeness. In other words, your spiritual evolution is not accidental. It's intentional. Driven by a higher intelligence that Jung recognized as your true self. Tolle confirmed this through his own experience, when he describes how presence spontaneously manifests in people's lives. When he talks about how awakening happens through surrender to the present moment, he's describing exactly the same process that Jung mapped scientifically. The Jungian self and Tolle's presence are two sides of the same cosmic coin, and that changes everything. Now imagine that you can consciously access this higher intelligence, that you can dialogue directly with yourself, that you can decode the messages it's constantly sending through your everyday experience. Jung developed specific techniques for this, methods he tested on himself during years of inner exploration, techniques that academic psychology buried along with his deepest theories. But before revealing those methods, you need to understand a fundamental truth that Jung discovered. a truth that will explain why your life sometimes seems like an incomprehensible chaos. Your self is constantly trying to awaken you through what Jung called compensation. When you're overly identified with one polarity, it creates situations that force you to experience the opposite polarity. When you're trapped in an illusion, it orchestrates events that expose that illusion. In other words, everything you consider problems in your life are actually messages from yourself, trying to expand your consciousness. This was Jung's most revolutionary discovery, that there are no innocent victims in the universe, only souls in the process of awakening, being guided by a higher wisdom that knows exactly what experiences are necessary for their evolution. Tolle confirmed this when he said that all problems are illusions created by the egocentric mind, that in the dimension of presence there are no problems, only situations that demand a response or acceptance. Now you understand why these ideas are so dangerous to the system. If people knew that their problems are actually opportunities for awakening orchestrated by universal consciousness itself, would they still feel like helpless victims dependent on external saviors? If they understood that every crisis is an invitation to transcend old limitations, would they still seek superficial solutions? The answer is obvious, and that's why Jung needed to be silenced. But let's get to what really matters. How can you apply these censored discoveries to accelerate your own awakening? Jung developed a process he called amplification, a technique for decoding the messages of the self through the symbols that emerge in your life. Recurring dreams, repetitive patterns, synchronicities. These are all direct communications from the collective unconscious trying to guide you to the next level of consciousness. And here's the first practical method, censored by modern psychology. Every night before you go to sleep, ask yourself a specific question. Not a vague question like, "What is my purpose?" but something specific about a pattern you're experiencing. Why do I keep attracting controlling people? What lesson is this financial situation trying to teach me? What do I need to understand about this family dynamic? Then pay attention to the symbols that emerge in your dreams over the next few nights. Jung discovered that the self always answers, always, but it speaks through symbols and metaphors that need to be decoded. Tolle would say this is unnecessary, that presence is directly accessible through attention to the present moment, and he's right. But here's what most people don't understand about Tolle's teachings. Presence doesn't eliminate the archetypes, it illuminates them. When you are truly present, the archetypal patterns operating through your life become transparent. You clearly see which forces are acting through your experiences, which archetype is being activated in each situation, how the self is guiding you through this cosmic dance of light and shadow. This is what Jung truly discovered. That individuation is not an individual process, it's a cosmic process. Universal consciousness itself awakening to itself through human experience. And you are both the instrument and the outcome of this awakening. But there's an obstacle that both Jung and Eckhart Tolle identified, a self-sabotaging mechanism so subtle that most people never notice its operation. Jung called it the shadow. Tolle calls it the pain body. Both are referring to the same thing, the part of the psyche that identifies with suffering and resistance, that prefers the familiarity of pain to the uncertainty of transformation, that systematically sabotages any genuine attempt at awakening. And here's the part that will shock you. This shadow isn't your enemy, it's your most severe teacher. Jung discovered that the shadow contains exactly the qualities you need to integrate to become whole. That all the characteristics you reject in yourself and project onto others are in fact undeveloped aspects of your true self. In other words, your shadow is your greatest treasure, disguised as your greatest fear. Tolle confirmed this when he taught that what you resist persists, that the only way to transcend any pattern is to accept it completely without identification, to allow it to be without being dominated by it. Jung and Eckhart Tolle were mapping the same territory from different angles, the spiritual geography of human transformation, and when you combine their approaches, something magical happens. You get a complete map to awakening, not just conceptual but experiential, not just mental but somatic, and not just individual but transpersonal. Now pause for a moment, close your eyes, take a deep breath. Because what I'm about to share will integrate everything you've learned so far into a revolutionary practical synthesis. a method that combines Jung's scientific precision with Tolle's elegant simplicity. Jung discovered that there are four main functions of consciousness: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition, and that most people develop only one or two of these functions, remaining unconscious of the others. But when you consciously cultivate all four functions, something extraordinary happens. You become capable of perceiving reality from multiple dimensions simultaneously. You develop what Jung called the transcendent function. Eckhart Tolle teaches exactly this through a different approach. When he talks about presence, he's actually describing a state where all the functions of consciousness are simultaneously active and integrated: thinking without identification, feeling without drama, sensation without compulsion, intuition without fantasy. Tolle's presence is Jung's transcendent function expressed in contemporary language. And when you understand this, you gain access to a method of transformation that is simultaneously ancient and ultra-modern, profoundly spiritual and rigorously scientific. Here's the integrated protocol that no self-help book will teach you. Every morning upon waking, before checking your phone, before allowing the reactive mind to take control, do this. Sit in silence for 5 minutes, not to meditate, not to visualize, but to simply be present with what is naturally emerging in your consciousness. Observe without judgment what thoughts arise. Jung would say these are communications from the unconscious. Tolle would say observing them without identification is pure presence. Both are right. Observe what feelings emerge in your body. Jung would say they are indicators of which archetypes are active. Tolle would say accepting them without resistance is wisdom. Both are right. Observe what physical sensations you are experiencing. Jung would say the body is the interface between conscious and unconscious. Tolle would say the body is your portal to the present moment. Both are right. And finally, observe if any intuition or insight arises spontaneously. Jung would say this is the voice of the self. Tolle would say this is universal intelligence manifesting through your individual consciousness. Both are right. Do this consistently for just 1 week, and observe how your perception of reality begins to expand, how you begin to notice synchronicities that previously went unnoticed, how you develop a growing sensitivity to the subtle messages the universe is constantly sending. This isn't mysticism, it's applied science. The science of consciousness that Jung discovered and that modern psychology still refuses to explore. But there's an even deeper level, a territory that Jung only touched upon and that Tolle explores with mastery. The recognition that behind all archetypes, behind all functions of consciousness, behind even the individual self, there is something even more fundamental: pure consciousness, the empty space in which all mental phenomena appear and disappear. What Tolle calls I am before any qualification, what Jung intuited as the primordial substrate of all psychic experience, and here's the final revelation that connects all the pieces of this cosmic puzzle. You are not just a person trying to awaken. You are universal consciousness, temporarily pretending to be a person in order to experience the process of awakening. Jung was mapping the stages of this process. Tolle was pointing to its ultimate destination. Together they offered humanity a complete map of the spiritual journey, from the initial identification with the ego to the final recognition of the boundless nature of consciousness. And modern psychology buried all of this because it recognized its revolutionary implication, that human beings are not biological machines that developed consciousness by accident. They are consciousness that manifested in biological form intentionally. This is the truth that Jung discovered, and that cost him his place in the official history of psychology, that you are much more than you imagine, that your life has a much deeper meaning than society can recognize, that there are intelligent forces operating through your experience that are constantly guiding you toward the recognition of your true nature. Jung called this individuation. Tolle calls it awakening. Ancient mystics called it enlightenment. But perhaps the name doesn't matter as much as the recognition. The recognition that you are not alone on this journey, that there is a higher wisdom orchestrating your evolution, that every experience, every encounter, every apparent obstacle is, in fact, an invitation to transcend the limitations you imagined to be real. And when you recognize this completely, something extraordinary happens. You stop fighting life and begin to dance with it. You stop trying to control the process and begin to trust the intelligence that has always been guiding you. Jung called this surrender to the self. Eckhart Tolle calls it surrendering to what is. Both Jung and Tolle pointed towards the same ultimate realization, that you were never truly in control, that it's always been life living through you, that your only real choice is to resist or to allow, to contract or to expand, to sleep or to awaken, and perhaps, just perhaps, the fact that you've made it to the end of this revelation is a sign that your self has already chosen awakening, that presence is already emerging through your consciousness, that the light they tried to extinguish in Jung is now shining through you. Because this has always been the deepest truth that modern psychology has tried to conceal. You don't need to be fixed. You don't need to be improved. You simply need to remember who you always were. Jung knew this. Eckhart Tolle knows this, and deep down in your heart, you always knew this too. The only question that remains is, are you ready to stop pretending you don't?